Good afternoon, members of parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, and those following by various forms of media. Welcome to this meeting of the Committee of Constitutional Affairs and Decolonization, number 4 of today, Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. I would like to give a special welcome to Mr. Joseph Lake Jr. and other representatives of the Independence for St. Martin Foundation. Also, a special welcome to Dr. June Sommer. We have established a quorum of 5 factions. Please stand for a moment of silence. I've received notice of absence from the following committee members, MPs Gums and MPs Westcott Williams, as well as notifications that MPs Peterson and Duncan will be joining us a bit later. Before going over to notifications, I would like to first wish everyone in St. Martin a beautiful and happy Flag Day. May our flag wave proudly, symbolizing the unity, strength, and rich heritage of our wonderful nation. Wishing us a joyous celebration filled with pride, patriotism, and a deep sense of community. Happy Flag Day to one and all. Do we have any notifications from members of the committee? That not being the case, members of the committee, we have 3 agenda points for this meeting. Firstly, presentation of Mr. Jose Lake regarding the history behind the name Philipsburg and the person it is named after, John Phillips. Secondly, presentation on the topic towards development of justice for the people of St. Martin. This is IS 736, dated May 4, 2023. And thirdly, discussion regarding the street named Van Romondtsteeg and a proposal regarding the renaming of the street by MP Rolando Brison. This is IS 718, April 21st, 2023. Agenda points 1 and 3 were requested by my person as the chair of the committee, and MP Heyliger-Marten had requested agenda point 2. We go over to agenda point 1, presentation by Mr. Jose Lake regarding the history behind the name Philipsburg and the person it is named after, John Phillips. Parliament received an email correspondence from my person dated April 21st, 2023, with the request that the meeting of this committee is convened by the above-mentioned agenda point. The reason for me requesting this meeting was based on discussions and very interesting discussions and eye-opening discussions that I initially had with Mr. Lake and Nzinga and Ms. Illis, who are here today, also joined by Mr. Friday. That really brought to our attention some things that I believe that the members of parliament and the community at large should be aware of regarding the naming of our capital, which is named after Mr. John Phillips, hence Philipsburg. At this time, I would like to give the floor to the requester of this meeting, and we will start first with Mr. Joseph Lake, who will then be able to introduce the rest of the members on the panel and go into their presentation. Mr. Lake, you have the floor. Just press it once, yeah, and then you can proceed.
Good afternoon. I would like to begin by thanking you for giving us, the Independence for St. Martin Foundation, the opportunity to come here today to explain to you and express to you our commitment towards making St. Martin, having St. Martin change the name from Philipsburg, the capital of St. Martin, to Great Bay, because we are convinced and assured that Great Bay, the name Great Bay, is a name which all our people can identify with. Without going any further into the details at this moment, I would like to turn the mic over to my sister. I have a problem with her new name. Nkosana Ellis.
Okay, Ms. Ellis,
I knew her for years as Esther, but now she has changed her name to show that she really means business.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lake. Let me just turn on. Yeah, you can go ahead, Ms. Ellis. Can you press the mic one more time, please? Yeah. No, you can go ahead. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to say a happy Flag Day to each and every one of us here today. As we honor our ancestors who have sailed from the Atlantic Ocean into the Caribbean Sea, sailed and sailed until they found this beautiful island called Great Bay Shores. The shores of Great Bay to our ancestors have always been a place where they enjoyed and still enjoy. Today is not a day that we can say, why is this happening? Today we also honor Rosalind Richardson, the elementary student that 38 years ago decided to draw this flag. Little did we know on this significant day, we would be here with you all in Parliament asking for a change of name from Philipsburg to Great Bay. As the ancestors walked to Marigot, you will hear them say, I'm going back to Great Bay. As I would hear my mother say, we're going Great Bay. Today, if I go to the northern side of the island and I visit the elders, they will ask me, how are your family doing in Great Bay? Let us remember our greatness, the greatness of our ancestors. For you and I, the sons and daughters of this soil, we are greatness. We come from greatness. Remember who you are. You are greatness. Let us recognize this greatness in each and every one of us as we do great things here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Illis, for your very beautiful presentation and introduction to the topic today. Next, we go to Mr. Friday. You have the floor.
Good day. It's an honor for me to be here this afternoon to address your honorable members on the occasion of the change of the name of Philipsburg to Great Bay. Growing up in St. Martin, I was privileged to grow up down the street in Philipsburg by a bar called Zanzibar. And that was at that time the only bar that existed in St. Martin of any significance where all the gatherings took place. All the politicians were there, all the local people had their occasions there, and discussions were always held. As a youngster, during those discussions, we were not allowed to participate in them, but we would peep through the window, listen to them carefully in what was being said. And during that entire period, in discussions about traveling or going back and forth, the word Philipsburg was never, ever mentioned by the elders. And that was in protest to the name Philipsburg, to the Phillips. These people were very well aware of the history of this vagabond, and therefore they always used the word Great Bay. And on occasions, the word tongue was used, as Greg says in his Calypso. Not town, it was called tongue. It was never, the word Philipsburg was never ever used. On other occasions, because of my upbringing, in those days we visited family. Visiting family on weekends was a great thing. And I was fortunate to be, I'm the fifth child of 10, and be held by my hand on weekends and going to cul-de-sac to visit family. That's from the Emilia Wilson Park down, who was cousins to my mother. And in all these discussions, I was privileged to be among these older people in all their discussions. And in discussing St. Martin and talking about going from one way to the other, again, it was either going to Marigot, it was going, not Marigot, it said Marigot in those days. It was either going to Grand Cars, French Quarter, or going to Great Bay. The word Philipsburg, again, was never ever used because these people knew the history of John Phillips. And that word was never ever used by the other people. Again, my history is to bring together all the occasions and being in the crowds of people where these things were never used. Being a musician at 15 years and playing to all the functions that had in St. Martin, then the official functions in John Lamney's band. Again, crowds of people were on these occasions, and there were never, ever the word Philipsburg were never, ever used. The word Great Bay was always used, or town. The only time the word Philipsburg were used were in schools, because then it was an official thing, and the nuns, of course, then, who are the leaders of education on this island, the decisions that were taken about education were made by them. In fact, I'll even stray a little bit here in that. In going to school in St. Martin, the word St. Martin was spelled like it is spelled on the northern side. It was never spelled St. Martin. That was done again by the Catholic nuns, saying the word St. Martin. It was always St. Martin. And to show you that, that's on the Catholic Church, they have this big mural of the St. Martin, who's named St. Martin of Tours, who it was named after. And you can imagine putting that up on that church. In those days, there were no heavy equipment, so all people gathered around to see this big thing going up on the church. And the name is spelled like it is on the northern side. It has never been, but again, it was always Great Bay. Great Bay was everything to St. Martin. A hotel was built in Martin, I'm going back, this is the 1950s and 60s now, before most of you were born. The major hotel that was built at that time was the Great Bay Hotel. It wasn't called Philipsburg, it was the Great Bay Hotel. There's a history behind that, also a very negative history about the building of that whole thing. But it was always the word Great Bay. Never, ever did the older people. They didn't protest the way we did by demonstrating and saying things, but in silence, they did their demonstration by never, ever mentioning this, the name of this vagabond who gave the name of this beautiful country, Philipsburg. So this is my thing of the history of St. Martin and why it should be called Great Bay as opposed to Philipsburg. I thank you, gentlemen.
And thank you, too, for that brief introduction and in terms of the history behind the use of Great Bay within our society back then. Thank you so much for that. And next we have Ms. Nzinga Lake. You have the floor. Press the button. Yeah. No, I think you can. Okay, you have the floor.
Okay. Honorable members of Parliament, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your presence and your support here today. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to wish everyone, our beloved St. Martin, a happy and joyful, safe Flag Day. I will be discussing our petition, as you see on the screen today. Make Great Bay the official name of capital St. Martin South. Based on the urgency and to gain the public attention, we created a petition on the website called change.org. The purpose of creating our petition was to raise awareness within our communities and also influence our government decision makers. The petition was very straightforward and impactful. As you can see, we used this photo of my father and my brother embracing the love and the pride of Great Bay. As you can see, Great Bay is beautiful, very beautiful. Our petition was easy to share through various social platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp messages. In total, we gathered 551 signatures within 3 days. Allow me, please, to kindly read some of the comments that we had received from some of the petitions who had signed. One person stated, "I am signing because we are slowly losing not only our culture, but what we stand for as one people, one destiny, and that includes our sweet St. Martin as well. The name has to be changed to reflect the wishes of our people. I am signing this petition because it's the right thing to do to reclaim our identity. I agree that we should change the name Great Bay because of my grandmother continuously using it. Know your history of whom the capital is named after. We should take a stand and have it renamed Great Bay, St. Martin. It is the right thing to do. Our people has lost for too long. Regain, reframe from the lost strain. And lastly, we cannot no longer, as a capital, name after a pirate, human trafficker, a torturer of enslaved Africans. I would like to say also to thank everyone who has signed our petition thus far. In closing, the present name of our capital, Philipsburg, is insulting, and we should not honor persons such as Mr. John Phillips, who has an abusive past. Grade B belongs to its people, past and present, and we should ensure that all St. Martiners and visitors fully embrace the renaming of our capital. Members of Parliament, with your support and stamp of approval, let's take back what is rightfully ours, our capital's name given by our ancestors and people, Grade B. I thank you.
Thank you for those opening remarks. Are there any others at this time? Yes, Mr. Lake, you can. Okay,
Good
you have the floor.
afternoon. I will begin with a quote from the Dutch secretary. The Dutch secretary, his name is Marten van Ooyen. That's his name. This is what he said in Sabre when they went to celebrate Emancipation Day. He said, and he's talking about us, the enslaved people, they had everything taken from them. Their freedom, their possessions, their dignity. They were stripped of everything that made them human. Stripped of everything that made them human. Even their names. Even the names. Without a name, you do not exist in historiography, and you won't formally be remembered. This is what the Dutch secretary said in Sabre. If you change they to we, you will get this. We had everything taken from us. Our freedom, our possessions, our dignity was stripped from, everything was stripped from us. That made us less than human. Even our names, without a name, you do not exist. If you studied what he said here, and you go back and you look at what happened with Grade B and John Phillips, you will see almost the same repeating taking place. John Phillips, for example, his slaves were murdered when he lost the battle against his main rival in Statia. They were murdered. They were murdered despite the fact that in reality they had nothing to do with it. It's likewise many times on our island, our people are murdered and taken advantage of without them having anything to say or do about it. But they pay the price. And this is what we are trying to avoid today when we ask you to consider what took place almost 400 or 500 years ago. But it's repeating itself. John Phillips was the man who they said was responsible for getting the economy in those days going. He was the one that encouraged them to forget about agriculture and move to the sugar plantations, sugar planting. He was the one that told them about salt. Let's get the salt industry going. He was the one that they made Vice Council. The Vice Council is so interesting because it reminds me so much about the Netherlands Antilles, where one island will get all the power and the rest of us will just have to suck it up. So when you see what John Phillips did, he was considered a big success. But his success was not for us, the people. His success was for his own people and those that sent him from the Netherlands to St. Martin to do their bidding. to make sure that they made money, to make sure that they got everything that they wanted at the expense of us, the people of St. Martin. And they, because he himself didn't name the town George Phillips, but his people, the people who was with him in the council, they were weak, and they decided to dominate them and make the situation, change the name to John Phillips. But all he did was, as time went by, he also lost his influence. He was never considered friendly. He betrayed his slaves. He left them to be murdered. He left his maid, his parents, the people that worked for him to be taken advantage of. So today we come to you as St. Martiners asking to ensure that John Phillips that we get the name Philipsburg to replace John Phillips. Great Bay to replace John. Oh, here I would like to also thank Mr. Will Johnson from Sable, who provided us with a great amount of information, which we are today sharing with you. I thank you.
Thank you once again, Mr. Lake. Any others at this time? No? Okay. Thank you once again, and like I mentioned, maybe with some of what we've been presented so far, maybe they will understand why I said when I first had the opportunity to hear this from you, let's say in an informal setting, I considered it very eye-opening. The fact is, even as someone that went to St. Joseph School, St. Martin Academy, never before did I ever hear this story told. I took it for granted. It's named Philipsburg because it's named Philipsburg. You were the first, Mr. Lake, to let me know about this, and I'm very happy for you to point this out to me. In addition to that, before turning over to the members of the committee, I also have some contribution from Mr. Will Johnson, that he has also done significant research into this topic, and I would like to share some of that with the members of the committee as well, because I think it ties into especially what took place based on the various research and the documentation he has been able to pull up over the years. Phillips, by 1735, Phillips was now commander of St. Martin. Before that time, the administrator of St. Martin was vice commander. In the new situation on the independence from St. Eustatius became a fact, and Phillips and his supporters, through this decision of the company, had gotten their wish after all. Phillips, from the perspective of the company, did a lot for the economy of St. Martin. He revived the neglected salt-making industry and saw to it that more mills were installed. The island was sparsely populated back then, and the plantations were only cultivating sweet potatoes, yams, and cassava, whereas sugar, cotton, and coffee were a promise of the products which could be exported. One second. According to Dr. J. Hartog, during Phillips' term as commander, Dutch St. Martin definitely saw this level of prosperity, he puts in quotation marks. The population rose sharply between 1715 and 1750. The population quadrupled to some 400 whites and over 1,500 slaves. There were 35 plantations, and the French side was going through a depression. John Phillips made it his business to get as many more people, including slaves, attracted to St. Martin. Some 200 colonists from elsewhere responded to his call on the promise of the new export economy of St. Martin. In addition, he called for many more slaves to be brought to St. Martin in order to help the economy continue and to start on new products such as sugar, cotton, coffee. Mr. Hassel also has what you can see at thesaberislander.com, where he has a lot of the other research and the sources to this various information that he has put together regarding Mr. John Phillips. But in essence, what is highlighted here goes into quite some detail. He was very instrumental in his eyes back then, being someone that would do a lot to improve the economy. But the only way that he was able to improve the economy was by bringing more slaves to our shores, by torturing more people, and by many of them who had died under his command. I think it's an interesting discussion, and one that we, like I said, I think many people that I've even spoken to this about or hearing this right now may be very surprised to hear what I've just read and what you all have just mentioned. And for members of the committee, you've heard basically that the call from the members is regarding the renaming of the capital. In doing some research in addition to that, it became clear that while there is an ordinance regarding the renaming of streets, it is not really clear to me, at least at this time, exactly what it would entail if St. Martin was to choose to change the name of the capital. So one of the things I do believe we need to get some more information on is if that was the direction St. Martin would want to go, legally, how is that done? Is that done? I would think it would need to be a high-level thing, a piece of legislation like a national ordinance, but I was not able to find any existing ordinance that dictates what actually makes our country named Philipsburg, or the capital of the country named Philipsburg. I was also interested when you mentioned that Great Bay Hotel, interestingly, in the 50s when it was built, there was a conscious decision that it was not named the Philipsburg Hotel or even the St. Martin Hotel. It was specifically named the Great Bay Resort. So that is also something interesting that brings back to the context that we have there. So I'd like to thank you once again for that presentation. And then now I look to the members of the committee, and we have first MP Heyliger-Marten. You have the floor.
A pleasant good afternoon to you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to my fellow colleagues and those listening, viewing online, and welcome to Mr. Lake, Ms. Ellis, Mr. Friday, and Ms. Lake as well. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I've known for a while about Philipsburg, the history behind Philipsburg. I see also, Mr. Chairman, that you have on a third agenda point to also rename a street. And my first question to you, Mr. Chairman, was to ask you exactly that. How do we go about making these changes? And do we only look at the capital? Do we only look at one street? Because there are many streets with colonial elements. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose to you, maybe we delve into this a little deeper, do some more research around it, and really stand by what the country as a whole would like to do by decolonizing the names surrounding our country. So with that, I would like to propose that we maybe look into this further, have a deeper, in-depth discussion internally, and see how we move forward to making these changes, because I'm a strong proponent of making that change. Thank you again for that, and thank you for enlightening the people, informing the people. And for that, I'll await from you, Mr. Chairman, how we move forward with these changes moving forward, for these dynamic changes to embrace our own. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Heyliger-Marten. Next, we have MP George Pantaflet. Oh, sorry. Yep, you have the floor.
Yeah, it wasn't you, it was me. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, my colleagues of the committee, of course, our distinguished guests, the Lake family, Ms. Ellis, and also Mr. Leo Friday. My apologies for being late. There were circumstances beyond my control. I didn't get to hear the entire presentation, but I believe when something is in your spirit, you don't need to hear the entire presentation because it's already there. And, I just Googled quickly, Mr. Chairman, through you, an article I wrote January the 30th of this year. And I'm going to just quote a little bit not a response or maybe opinion of the editorial on the same day. And I quote, Member of Parliament George Pantaflet wants all names of public entities, including buildings and streets with a Dutch European reference, to be eradicated because of their neo-colonial context. He mentioned the capital, Philipsburg. He mentions, for instance, Juliana International Airport, the Prince Bernard Bridge, just to name a few. Mind you, I'm continue quoting the editorial, This is not just a local but a global issue. Let me stop here. I'm talking about, I have nothing to do with the global issue. I'm talking about St. Martin. So I don't know why they really want to talk about a global issue. It continues. For example, the removal of statues honoring pro-slavery Confederates. We have any Confederacy in St. Martin? I mean, we're talking St. Martin and not S-I-N-T, through Mr. Chairman, Mr. Friday. That's correct. If you notice, whenever I write an article, I put S-T. I don't put S-I-N-T. Okay? I don't spell it that way. St. Martin for me is S-T dot, and then you put Martin behind of it. And it continues here. The memo suggested last month's slavery past apology by the Dutch government was a mere attempt to divert attention from international criticism of its violation of human rights. That's a fact. The Dutch, they're getting pressure in external, so they're trying to kind of cover up, which we know. There was a time we wouldn't know, but they're trying to cover up, and therefore we have to press this issue as much as possible. He said agreeing only to an awareness fund, but no reparatory justice, confirms that while St. Martin's debts to the Netherlands are not cancelled, its people remain enslaved. Because if you owe, you are slave to the person who you owe. Now, I really hope that this discussion that we're having today, Mr. Chairman, and I really hope our colleagues really take it serious, because the fact is, your name is your identity. Your name is your identity. Your language is your identity also. Now, people would say English is my language. It is not my language. I have no clue what my language is. I have no clue. It's not Dutch. It's not English. It's not French. It's not Spanish. It's not Greek, or whatever other language you speak. I Google, I think Nigeria has about 2,000 languages. Africa alone has about 7,600 languages. Imagine if we know exactly our identity. We don't understand how brilliant the people we are. It is time for us to free ourselves mentally of the reminder and the reminders of these names that tells us or does not identify who we are. So I am very happy that this presentation has been done today. And yes, you need legislation in order to see how you can make the changes. It was me. I'll make my own legislation. St. Martin legislation, this is how we want it done by the people. That's it. Not sit down at no process that is done by the Dutch, how you should get this advisors, XYZ. No, the people are advisors, is what they want. We do what they want. We have to stop from the system that was not made by us. Make our own. We are wise enough to do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Pantaflet, and next, MP Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you, to the SG. Good afternoon to my colleagues here in Parliament. Good afternoon to our invited guests, distinguished indeed. Thank you so much, not only for this presentation, but all the work that you have done over the years. Mr. Chairman, we recently returned from IPCO, a group of us, and some of us had a tour of the Maurice House in Den Haag. Now, before entering the house, it is a museum. Entering the house, I got goosebumps. I did not know who Maurice was. John Maurice, I think his name is. Didn't know who he was, but I knew that something was happening in me. I didn't know at the time what. Now, the director of Maurice House said that she had given a tour to someone else, a lady, I think of Surinamese descent. And the lady came to the front door and she told her, I can't enter. And she was like, why? It's such a beautiful museum and come and look at the paintings. And she was like, no, my ancestors will not allow me to enter. And when the director told us who Maurice was, I was like, ooh. No wonder I felt the way that I felt, and honestly, being there felt extremely uncomfortable. Now, the director also said that there were some petitions in the Netherlands about changing the name of the house, but actually, it's his house, so he can keep, he can keep the name of the house. That is different, though, to schools on Curaçao named after Maurice. That is different to streets on St. Martin named after not John Phillips, but Van Romont and other persons in our history who should not be honored, because honoring them means remembering their names and who they were. And as MP Pantaflet said, it also has an impact on who we are and our identity. So I'm thankful to be a part of this parliament now and to be a part of this, and I think this is extremely necessary because this is the time that we are now in. In thinking about what was said about Great Bay, I flashed back to maybe being 10 years old in Mac and learning the song, This Land is My Land, our version of This Land is My Land, This Land is Your Land, from Great Bay Village. Philipsburg was never part of the song, and I started to think about it. I was like, really, like growing up, where was Philipsburg? It really was about Great Bay. I don't think this is an issue, although we have a responsibility to create public awareness, but I don't see how this can be argued against. Of course, they will have people that will say, you know, why should we change the capital? But I believe that this is something that everyone should get behind because, again, it is about honoring not only our ancestors, but those who fought against a system that was, you know, all about atrocities against our own people, and we should raise awareness. Mr. Chairman, this committee has a lot of work to do. The committee was designed in this time to do this type of work. You mentioned the fact that we will need to find out exactly how to make the legislative changes. What is important for me as well, in addition to public awareness, is the policy level changes that need to be made because at our level we can say, okay, this is the name change, but government needs to do a lot of work in order to not only change the name locally but internationally. So I believe that we should get some volunteers to take this process further, and everyone should have work to do in order to really see this through, because these are the times that we are living in, and I think we have a responsibility. So I'd just like to, again, thank Mr. Lake, Mr. Friday, my father's good friend from a long time ago, Ms. Ellis, Ms. Lake, thank you so much for the work that you continue to do, and I think here in Parliament we have a responsibility to join you in that mission and make this change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Duncan. MP Grisha Heyliger-Marten would like the floor once again. You have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, many are tuned in to this meeting, and I'm getting some information because I started querying what we should do next to get this done, and I was just informed that there's a street naming committee that's a bit not in action right now. It's kind of dormant. It's mainly with Romney in collaboration with Census Department, TIAT, Cadastre, and Post Office. I don't know if my fellow MP, Rayon Peterson, can elaborate a little bit on it because I see he's next. And maybe that's the path we should take, and to see how we can bring back that committee and then have a meeting with them and see where we go from there. But I think I'll, through you, Mr. Chair, allow MP Peterson to elaborate on it because he seems to know more on it. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Heyliger-Marten. Next, MP Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A good afternoon to yourself. A good afternoon to the panel, Mr. Lake, Ms. Ellis, Mr. Friday, and Ms. Lake. To my colleagues and everybody else tuned in, Mr. Chairman, I would have to agree with most of what my colleagues said today. You know, given the history of the name Phillips, I think that it's actually very vanzelfsprekend, as they say, that the name should be changed. But then, of course, our concerns are also valid, and the concerns from the panel and the concerns from the MP. So we're looking at what is going to happen internationally. What will be the effects of this? How will it affect our tourism? How will we go about these changes? And how will we make sure that the whole world knows that as of this point, this name change will take place? That is one of the aspects of it. Of course, we also have the streets. Like MP Heyliger-Marten said, the streets is a little bit more easy to assess when it comes to the law because that does fall under VROMI. So I do know that within the VROMI department, and I think it's specifically the permits department that they handle with street names. But when it comes to the capital, that's a little bit more intricate because like the chairman said, we don't have a specific law, well, that I could have found that basically says that Philipsburg is the capital of St. Martin. In Holland, you have their grondwet, which is like our constitution. And in there, they don't actually mention that Amsterdam is the capital of Holland. They actually allude to it being the capital in Article 32, I think, in which it basically explains, I think, what the king has to do when he gets sworn in. So in that article, they mention at some point the Hoofdstad Amsterdam. We don't have a similar article in our constitution. We don't have the word Philipsburg in our constitution at all. So I think a good legal research is necessary to see how do we go about that change. Do we create a new national ordinance as Parliament? And if so, how will that work in regards to the statute, in regards to the constitution? Those are the questions that that I would want to see answered first, and I think that I would also want to assist in that research. And another aspect that I also wanted to bring forward is we've learned a lot here today. I've learned a lot in this hour about our history, and how will we try to push this onto education? How will we make sure that the kids understand that this is actually our history? And like some MP said, how do we avoid the reaction of why you want to change it? It's been Philipsburg, just leave it at that. I think that a good campaign of understanding why we want to walk this route is actually necessary, not only for the kids, but for the whole of St. Martin. And I think that if we do it with all hands on deck, I think that this is actually a good initiative. So I thank you guys once again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Peterson, and also members of Parliament. What I would like to propose, being that the topic, especially where it's going now, is quite interconnected, I would like to propose that within this agenda, we handle what would have been agenda point 3 regarding Van Romondtsteeg, because I just really have one thing in line with that to say. So we would handle that point so that right after this, we can go straight into Dr. Sommer's presentation. Agreed? So right now, we will no longer have agenda 3, discussion regarding street name Van Romondtsteeg. We will just have agenda point 1, and then we will go next to agenda point 2. We have now MP Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, I mentioned John Maurice of Nassau, but I didn't say who he was.
Yeah.
He was basically like a governor general of Dutch Brazil. So the Dutch colony in Brazil. It was extremely, extremely lucrative. Sugar, his house that is now a museum, if you see how lavish it is, built on the backs of our ancestors. So I just wanted to say who he was, John Maurice of Nassau. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that insight as well, MP Duncan. As I just mentioned, being that the topics are quite interconnected, I wanted to, in addition to highlighting what we have with Great Bay, as you've heard from the members of the committee, various of us realize that I think, at least from a committee perspective, there is some consensus in terms of moving forward with this. The question is how. The legal basis is not as clear. I wouldn't think, maybe I'm wrong, but I wouldn't think it would require constitutional change, but would it require a national ordinance that's drafted that states or declares the capital of St. Martin is Great Bay? That national ordinance could also perhaps be used to also then tie into policy so that the government shall have a certain time frame in order to change certain other policies. So we have to investigate that, and I think what we will do is we'll conduct that investigation as a committee, perhaps by asking further questions to the government to have their legal affairs department, if they've done some research on this already, the Ministry of Romy and others, to provide us with some additional information. So I think kind of in line with what MP Grisha Heyliger-Marten stated, we're going to go deeper into this as a committee, and then we'll be able to report back to the public and yourselves on what we believe is a way forward. In regards to street names, in particular, Van Romondtsteeg is another example, and I believe there's some parallels between when you look at John Willem van Romont and what you hear about Mr. John Phillips. Also, I have to once again say Mr. Will Johnson, quite a very knowledgeable person that provides so much information on these things, and well-sourced, various books that he can refer to where this is all documented. And just to give a bit of a quick background, John Willem van Romont was governor of St. Martin during the slave period on the island. On the 8th of April, 1848, the French commander informed the governor by writing that the Republic of France will declare the freeing of slaves on the French colonies as of the 17th of April, 1848. The French freed their slaves as promised with a decision of the government that came to power after the French Revolution of 1848. However, the enslavement remained a fact of life on St. Martin, so the Dutch side, until July 1st, 1863. On 29th of May, the day after abolition of slavery on the French territories, 26 persons, the entire enslaved population of Diamond Estate Plantation in St. Martin, fled to the plantation Mount Fortune in St. Martin, the northern side, where they were recognized as free men and women. The Dutch commander, Johannes Willem van Romont, wrote the French commander, Saumonier, asking and demanding that the returned runaway slaves, asking him to return any runaway slaves. The French commander replied that any enslaved person who reached the French territory would be considered free. After that, it goes into the efforts that Van Romont made. He didn't stop there. He traveled to Guadeloupe. He traveled to Martinique. He wrote letters to the French government. And he was insistent on trying to make sure that the slaves that were able to escape to the French side would be returned to the French side. And thankfully, to the Dutch side. And thankfully, he was unsuccessful. I think someone that has played such an important part, and when you hear of the effort that he made to not only, let's say, maintain the enslaved population, but also say, no, you need to return our property, as he called it in writing to the French commander, which, historically speaking, I guess to the French commander's credit, he basically told him, run out, like we say. And now, when you look at that, we have right here, right next to Coliseum Casino, we have Van Romondtsteeg, and it's named after him. And, you know, in having this discussion with you, I found it also something, as was pointed out, probably a little simpler for the government to consider. And I believe, for example, my proposal would be if that street was named after such a terrible governor, perhaps then maybe we should rename that street to our first governor, Mr. Eugene Holiday. And I think that's something that we can perhaps consider. We can decorate the street as a sort of street where we can honor our local heroes, create a nice wall of fame, so to speak, on the left side of the building, you know, speaking to the owner of the building, having some statues, make it a nice educational and historical street for St. Martin, where people, tourists, everyone can walk through and see our local heroes, learn our history, and change it from a street that historically honors or remembers someone that was so instrumental in trying to keep slavery as long as possible in St. Martin, to now someone that served our country for, I believe, 12 years it was in total as governor of our country. So I think that is something that we can also follow up on with the government. I think that would be a matter of us then asking the government to give us some information regarding their committee that they have established. I know the legislation is, from a legislative perspective, it's pretty clear that it falls under the Minister of Romy for the renaming, but also the possibility of, you know, switching from one terrible governor to an honorable governor, making that specific request is something we should also consider, in my opinion. On that topic, anyone wishes the floor? MP George Pantaflet.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank my colleagues also for pointing out certain important issues. I don't want us to allow ourselves, though, to get caught up in a matter of where it has to do with legislation. I understand legislation and so on and how complicated it can be. But again, I want to emphasize we have to look at as much as possible as to how we can do it our way and the way it has to please us. Because again, we are in a system that was not created by us. A legal system is called the Roman Dutch law, that is not ours, that has been put in place in order to keep us, let me use the word simply, captives. So we have to make sure that when we look at those laws, see exactly what our realities are and how much we can start putting our own legislation in place, I think that is key because, you know, sometimes I feel as if because they have been indoctrinated for so long in a system for hundreds of years that we think that, hey, you know, we can't get out of it, but we can, because I believe we are wise enough, we're intelligent enough. If we think hard enough, we can do so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Pantaflet. Next, we have MP Christopher Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you, my honorable colleagues, and our esteemed guest here, I just can't wait to be calling Philipsburg Grade B. Like how we the same Marigot in Grade B, the old folks. You see the whole legislation and talking to, it's confusing me. It's really confusing me because I would want to believe that with a pen, this can simply be done because it didn't take all of this legislation and all kind of stuff for it to be called Philipsburg. It was named after a criminal. But we are here sitting down and having a long discussion on how we should go about and how this should be done and all sort of different names. And, you know, not to take nothing away from our own people, but to remove the name from one street from one governor and put it to the name of another governor is still a governor. I mean, at the end of the day, slavery brought us here and colonialism have kept us here. So what are we trying to get rid of? Both of them. So I, for one, wouldn't be in favor of removing the name of one governor to replace it with another governor, whether he's from here or not. It is still the governor, which is vestiges of colonialism. Listen, it's either we want to get it done or we don't want to get it done. So we find the committee, get the names, get the street, get Philipsburg, and we remove all the semblance of colonialism, remove all the semblance of slavery, remove everything, and then it leads to our road of independence, and then we're good. Then we don't have to worry about all these sort of things and legislation for here and legislation for this. And I mean, guys, what it is we really want. This is like tippy-toeing on an issue that we know it is wrong. We know it is wrong. All over throughout the Caribbean, they're not going through legislation, they're ripping them down. In the United States, they ain't talking to the White House and they ain't talking to the states, and they're ripping them down. Here in St. Martin, yeah, but let us get a committee and I know that it is wrong. Let us do this. So we're going to try to name. No. We give an instruction that this is what we want done. This is a committee. We have the majority. We want it done or we don't want it done. Government, this is what we want done. Right or wrong? I mean, this is what Parliament is all about. I'm sitting here, I didn't want to say anything, but I'm starting to get annoyed with us always trying to be nice to please whom? Who? I thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Christopher Emmanuel. Next, MP Rian Peterson.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. Again, I would have to agree with most of what my colleagues say. I mean, I understand their point. What MP Emmanuel said just now about the governor, I understand what he means. Maybe it's a little bit difficult to say because in regards to the person, Eugene Holiday, I don't think that was the intention. But of course, the body, a governor, as per the statute, as per our charter, is a Dutch body. It is a kingdom body, and it does not represent St. Martin, period. And that is nothing to take nothing away from anybody who's going to be the governor of St. Martin, but that is just what the law says at the moment. On the other hand, I also kind of agree with the sentiment of we can do it. Well, when it comes to the street names, I believe that the minister is the one who can do it. Of course, we can instruct him, but it's not only about doing it. It's about the effects of these changes as well, because I also would want to see all of these changes. I mean, for Romondtsteeg, that's kind of giving. I mean, that has to change. My concern would be, have we talked to the candy heaters on the street to see how they feel about it, how they feel about what the street would become? And in that discussion, I would want to also say that once we start changing the street names, the principle is fought, but then the effects come into play. Postkantoor, GB, our bills, our addresses, the banks, everything has to be rolled out in a way that it informs the people in the right way. Because if we change these street names and we put it in afkondigingsblad as per Vromi, that's fine and dandy. But if GB or WIP doesn't know that the address has changed, then you are going to put civilians in certain predicaments that you could have avoided. You know, so I do agree that we are Parliament, we can do it, but we also have to do it right. So it might take a little bit longer, but to do it right, I think what should have to be the priority, as long as the consensus is that it has to be changed. And that's just my little 2 cents on the topic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Peterson. And next we have MP Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do agree with both my colleagues. It goes further than just these couple of names that we have mentioned. I'm going to mention the P word policy. There needs to be a policy in place because moving forward, when we are no longer here, if we want to honor those who came before us, me living at Tiger Road, should be able to propose maybe a resident of that road who I believe the road should be named after. And that is why there needs to be some sort of proper process in order to move forward. In the United States, there are also ceremonial names. Okay, maybe we might not want to name a street, however, we might also not rename a street, but we might want to add a sort of ceremonial. We grew up saying Cahill. It's actually Little Bay, you know, that's the district. Little Bay is the district. So I think we do have a responsibility to not only ask government what's their role and how they can make this a reality, but also to tell them to put a proper procedure in place so that moving forward, there doesn't need to be a discussion, that there is a process in place for renaming streets, especially as it concerns our history and honoring those who came before us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Duncan. Having heard that discussion, indeed, I think one thing that we can agree on, let's say on the topic of the street or street naming in general, that it's something that should be done. Where the differing opinion, what I sense is that whether it is something that should be extremely meticulous or it should be something gone, let's say, to the other side of the extreme, which is just get it done. I do think there's an in-between, because I don't think we should worry too much about the marketing and the post cantor and this type of stuff. If you look at Van Romondtsteeg, for example, I believe there's maybe 3 businesses there and 1 resident. So that is something that doesn't to say it's going to affect an entire district. In terms of the naming, I think, yes, it's a good point to maybe have the discussion with who lives there and maybe also via the community. But I think for the renaming of that street, I think what MP Emmanuel has stated, where perhaps rather than kind of dancing around the topic, let Parliament take a decision. And when I say take a decision, let's bring this to a meeting, let's present a motion, and let's get it to the government. You know, then a decision is taken, and then the government should act. And if they're not going to act, then they should inform the Parliament why not, or how, or whatever. So I do agree with that sentiment. You know, we have a lot of discussions within our committees. We see an example like yesterday where one committee leads to tangible things coming out of it. I would want that this discussion leads to something tangible. So with regards to the renaming of the street, I would then propose that this discussion is handled by means of a decision of Parliament in a public meeting further. And let us take a decision, and let us then say, look, this is what the Parliament feels. Every person, every individual can give their opinion and say yes or no. And I think that would be my proposal, that this is handled further in a public meeting. I think in that setting as well, after having received whatever research or information the members of Parliament want, we should also take a decision on Great Bay and Philipsburg. I think, yeah, the discussion has sparked the fact that Parliament needs to take decisions and create a position. And then the government then needs to tell us what are they going to do based on this position of Parliament. So my proposal is that, coming to the first point, we get the necessary information so that the members of Parliament can take an informed decision, or let me rather say, create an informed position, and then those positions should be handled in a public meeting where the government can then work it out further, because any motion that we pass, they then have to respond. So that would be my proposal, that going forward, a report is sent, or a decision list is sent on to the Central Committee and or rather the Parliament. So we're all members of Parliament, but formally speaking, have this decision list sent for further handling in a public meeting. Thank you. Yes? Okay, so as you've heard, based on this discussion, we're going to gather the necessary information, but we won't stop there. The decision would be what the committees normally draft, which is a decision list with the points that were discussed here today, the main idea, decisions that the committee believes should be done. We handle that further in a public meeting, in a future meeting, and then we take the necessary decisions, hold the necessary consultations via the public meeting instead. Agreed, members of the committee? Okay, great. So at this time, I would like to thank, if there's any closing remarks or reactions perhaps to the members of the committee, I would afford you that opportunity. I see Ms. Illis would like the floor. You have the floor.
We would only like to say thank you so much for the opportunity, for giving us the opportunity to share with you why it's so important to have Philipsburg change to Grade B. And also was a very fruitful discussion, a discussion that we can say, yes, we know it is going to make our ancestors happy as well as future generations to come. But let's not sleep on it. Let's make it happen like now. You know, let's take action and not just be words and then leave it here and then it died out, but let us be very active on it. And I trust that this is what's going to happen, and that's what we feel today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ms. Illis, for those closing remarks. Mr. Friday?
I just want to make a comment also because I think what everybody is, I think we're on the same page. It's just a matter of how we proceed in it. Because it's not only Grade B, there's Heyliger-Marten. That's something that is definitely should be. And not only that, that property there is a monumental property. That's where the slaves were registered when they came to St. Martin in front of Orania School. These are things that a committee should be formed to do a total job on this whole thing, because we should not talk about international, it's being done internationally. This is a normal procedure. We shouldn't be hesitant to do these things. It's not against anyone, it's for St. Martin. I think we got to start thinking in that manner. We always think about how other people feel and not what's in the interest of this country. And that leads to my thing and these things can only happen, and I'm going off trail here, if you're an independent country. And I want to say this to the members of parliament here. The issue, and I'm strained, but I think it's important that it's the issue of independence, and we are not prepared, is no country in the entire world has been prepared for independence. When you left your mother's home, you became independent when you left. While you're in the house, you can't become independent. The colonial master will never allow you to become independent in his house. So for you to become independent, you've got to leave. This idea of being prepared and not being prepared, it took the Holland 400 years after the independence to become a country. But we are scared of, and not only that, I want to say this to people. We built this country before anybody was here. I grew up in a country where the word French and Dutch was never, ever mentioned. We've gone to this stage. We talked about St. Martiners. We built this country from the ground up. I know St. Martin when the front street was not paved. I know when if you had an outhouse, you were rich. Outhouses were on the pond field. We built this country ourselves without the help of any colonial master, without the Dutch or the French. And we are now talking about how we can do it again. It's done. It's just making the decision to do it. That's what's important. And I agree with Christopher. Let's stop trying to be diplomatic about these type of different things. Let's get it done. And to say this, let me say this: in changing of the name, the process is there. I think if you go back over what happened before with the 721 thing, the process, I think, legally is there to change things, and the process of going to the telecommunications company who then internationally goes, all that those processes are there already. In fact, what we should be thinking of, Parliament should be following up on, because despite the fact that we have done this before with 721, we are still not registered in the international market, because you can hardly do anything with St. Martin on the market, while even Anguilla is registered in the international market. We are still not in that phase. So I think it's a committee should be formed, in a whole revamping of these things should be done. And not a committee should be formed to do it in 2 years from now, 10 years from now. We've got to have limits. I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Friday. Next, is it working now, or I think no? It's working? Okay, yes. No, press again one more time. Yes, and then.
Is
go
there?
right ahead.
Okay.
It's on. You're on.
All right. Again, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for giving us the opportunity. I guess we all on the same page. So one island, one people. We come from greatness. And just lastly, I'd just like to wish in advance everyone a happy Father's Day here in Parliament. Uncle Robbie, happy Father's Day, and all the staff, as well as everyone near and far. Even though you're not a father, if you are a mentor, a guidance to anyone, I'd like to wish you a happy Father's Day in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Joseph Lake. Oh, one more, just press it once. There you go.
Let me just say thanks to everybody for being here and for believing in St. Martin, because I believe everyone who here truly, truly loves St. Martin. And there's one way to go. I can't help myself. I have to say, independence is the only way out of this thing. Everything else is secondary. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And actually, one of the things that the committee is working on is that we do have a petite comité that is doing the necessary research in terms of preparing for, or what would be necessary for preparing for a referendum. I was going to ask MP Duncan if she would be able to give us an update on the progress of the petite comité. So before going to that agenda point, I know we're all anxiously awaiting Dr. Summers, but I would just ask if you can give a brief update on that as well. Sorry, I said Summers. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Petite Committee has met a few times. Each one of the members have done the work necessary. So looking at the legal implications and the process, what a referendum would need in terms of public relations, marketing. The only thing that we are missing is some information on hosting the referendum itself from the main voting bureau, but that we are hoping to get this week, and then we will present our report to Parliament, and Parliament will have to decide from there. But we have done what we need to do, and we're finishing up that report this week. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, excellent, and thank you for that update, which the Independence for St. Martin Foundation, I'm sure, was happy to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to adjourn this meeting for 5 minutes so that we can excuse our esteemed guests who are with us right now, and then we will go over to agenda point 2. Meeting adjourned for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. I hereby reopen this meeting. Before I continue on the other agenda point, I believe it's important based on the discussion we had on agenda point 1 and 3 with regards to the changing of street names and so on, that the Minister of Romy, Mr. Durang, should come in and give some more information regarding to those points, because I believe it's very, very important. We are going to right now proceed to agenda point 2, which is the presentation on the topic towards development justice for the people of St. Martin. But before I do so, I believe Member of Parliament Grisha Heyliger, who is the one who requested this meeting, you have the floor to give an elucidation on the matter. You have the floor, MP.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, please allow me some time to introduce Dr. Schumer by reading out a snippet of her extensive resume. Dr. Schumer currently serves as the chair of the Open Council of the University of the West Indies, as a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, and a member of the St. Lucia Reparations Committee. She served as a St. Lucian Plenipotentiary Ambassador at CARIBCOM and the OECS with responsibility of the diaspora affairs, was an OECS commissioner, and was the Secretary General of the Association of Caribbean States, ACS. Mr. Chairman, I won't take up much of your time, as I know that Dr. Schumer also has some valuable time, a lot of meetings set up this week. But I just want to say that since the start of my term, I've been championing new relationships and ways of governing within the kingdom that will allow our Caribbean islands to develop and prosper. And during my research, I came across Dr. Schumer and her work, and I must say that I'm very happy that I did. For this meeting, it is important to point out that Dr. Schumer completed the Sustainable Development Plan for the Virgin Islands. This document was unanimously adopted by the entire House of the Assembly. The plan combines sustainable development, capacity building, constitutional reform, public education and awareness, reparatory justice, and other important objectives based on the needs and wishes of the people of the BVI in a guiding document. And as I pointed out during the 2023 budget debate a few months ago, the government of St. Martin should consider using the BVI plan in approach towards addressing the nation's needs and development as an example. So with that said, I sincerely hope that she shares with Parliament and the people of St. Martin what she shares with us today will at least sow the seeds of a new approach towards sustainable development for our nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member of Parliament Heyliger-Marten. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Schumer for some introductory remarks and a presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm June Schumer, and you heard a little bit about me. But let me say that I'm very happy to be here, especially as you're celebrating Flag Day, and to say what a good presentation you had before. And I feel very honored to be able to follow such a very good presentation. When doing the research to present to you, I came across a poem called St. Martin. And it says, it's not in order, but these are the lines in the poem. The island is very small. Only the setting sun is big. This island of only 2 postmen. And I thought it was very telling because it spoke to the issue of size and it spoke to the issue of development to me. Because we always think that we are too small to develop and to be autonomous. But I want you to know that I served in an organization, as the minister said, the ACS, where we had the smallest democracy in that organization, and that was St. Kitts and Nevis. And just let me give you a little comparison with regard to St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Martin. The population of St. Kitts and Nevis is between 53 to 54,000 people. the population of St. Martin is between 41 and 42,000 people. Not much difference. But we have, well, these are the statistics I saw on the World Bank website, which is my source. And St. Kitts is an independent country. Not much difference in size. The GDP of St. Kitts and Nevis is $0.98 billion US dollars. The GDP from my statistics of St. Martin is 1.19 billion. And in fact, the GDP of St. Martin is one of the biggest in the Caribbean. The debt of St. Kitts and Nevis is 1.6 billion. The debt of St. Martin is about 1.13 billion. I am giving these statistics to show that we are in a position to make very big decisions with regard to the future of this country and the sustainable development of this country. And so to help me, I have put together a presentation that speaks to some of the contextual frameworks that exist right now that would assist you in making that decision. I also look at some purposes and objectives, the Sustainable Development Goals themselves, some opportunities, and the way forward. My 4 conceptual frameworks are, the first one, the right to decolonization, which is the C24, 1945 and 1960, what was said there. The right to development, which is a declaration by the UN in 1986. The Sustainable Development Framework for 2015 to 2030, and reparatory justice. And I use 2013 as my beginning point because it's the CARICOM framework that I'm really looking at. But just to say that reparations and the call for reparatory justice started the first day an enslaved person was put on a ship. We have always called for repair of our situation. Now, with regard to the first framework, when you look at the decolonization efforts of the United Nations, that started since the United Nations was formed. From the beginning, it was recognized that there was a need to remove colonization from these countries and to rebuild a new world based on equity and equality. And it was agreed that we should look at the social, economic, political, educational progress of these countries that are non-self-governing, and to look at the due respect for their culture and for the peoples that are concerned. It also put an obligation on these countries that are administering powers to be able to transmit to the United Nations information on the conditions of these non-self-governing bodies and countries. And there are 17 of these countries and territories in our very region right now, and you know that they belong to various European colonizers as well as the United States. So when the C24 was established, it was actually 17 people at the time. It then evolved to be the C24, and it looked at, it has a certain membership. You see there are a number of countries from the Caribbean in the membership of the C24. And I'm saying that to tell you that right now, St. Lucia, where I am from, is the chair of that committee presently. And a lot of the Caribbean territories are behind the C24 and the decolonization process and the movement towards autonomy to remove all of these countries from under house arrest. And because of that, we have heard a number of hearings, et cetera, in that regard, and how we are moving. And just recently in Indonesia, there was a discussion with regard to the colonies and the countries that are considered colonies. And I listened to that very carefully because the Virgin Islands were presenting, and I prefer to call them the Virgin Islands. It is what is in their constitution. The same way your people want to call this St. Martin, that people should call themselves what they are. And we see a number of recommendations that have been made over the years, since the 1940s to the United Nations, and it's taking very long for us to look at decolonization of these countries. And so what of St. Martin? Why are we having this issue? I think the biggest issue surrounds the debate between competence and authority. Whether you think yourselves competent enough to be able to lead an independent country, or whether other people see you as competent enough because of your size, etc., to become an independent country, and who should have the authority over you. So these are the issues that we have to look at when it comes to your country. And you will notice that you are considered autonomous because of the issue of the Kingdom of the Netherlands from about 2010. You are considered autonomous. But what does that mean? Does that give you the authority? Because with autonomy must come authority, but you don't seem to be the ones with the authority. And you must always consider, under the issue of autonomy, the issue of participation and culture. How do your people participate? And are they allowed to participate in the decision-making? And what about your culture? I know that you have many different nationalities in the island, but then what of your cultures? And how does that play a part with regard to your moving towards more autonomy? And you have recognized that you're in an ambiguous position. You have it clearly written in your National Development Vision Statement that it does not give you enough and sufficient constitutional autonomy to take advantage of the developmental opportunities that are available to you as a small island developing state, which is what you are. And so in practice, you do not have what you need to be able to move yourselves forward. And in that quotation, you actually say that there is conflicting and confusing interpretation of your status within the international community. And we want to remove that ambiguity so that you can fulfill your developmental potential. The next framework is the right to development, and that right was established by charter by the United Nations in 1986, and it declares that there is something called universal human rights. So what is your universal human right? That all human beings are born free and equal, and you can see it in the charter, the issues about equality, the right to a standard of living adequate for your well-being, the right to self-determination of people, and that is about participation. You also have the right to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms proclaimed can be fully realized for all peoples everywhere without discrimination. That's about human rights. And you know how we have had to fight for the issue of human rights because, as I heard from your people who presented earlier, we weren't considered property. We were not actually considered human beings. So now the issue of human rights, we are the ones who put it on the agenda, the global agenda. We have a right to be human beings when we were told we didn't have that right. And so the Declaration and the General Assembly recognizes that you have a right to comprehensive economic, social, cultural, and political processes that are aimed at improving your well-being, and that all individuals, all peoples of the world should recognize that there must be fair distribution of development. Ask yourself whether or not there's fair distribution within this country, and that your development should be people-centered, it should ensure participation and also equity. I also want you to understand that this right to development puts a lot of emphasis on your right to full sovereignty over all your natural wealth and resources. And there must be participation in that regard. The next framework is the Sustainable Development Framework, which is built, because you can see as I go along that each of these frameworks build on each other and give you certain rights that you should have as a people. And so the Sustainable Development Framework is the continuation of that, of all of these frameworks, and it recognizes that there must be an end to poverty, and that there must be strategies built on economic growth and addressing social needs, including education, social protection, job opportunities, tackling climate change, environmental protection, and providing a critical framework for resiliency building, which is one of the things that we must do, and also addresses critical governance issues. So within that framework then, we do have the ability to look at how we move the country forward in more than one sphere. And the framework looks at people, it looks at, so you look at your people first, then you look at your partnerships, because you do have the opportunity to create partnerships as you go along, and we can speak about that later. You must have the issue of prosperity. We have not been given the opportunity to create wealth, and to create wealth for our people, which is why the debt is so high. Why is the debt so high when there has been no attempt to create wealth for the people? So we have to ask how this money has been spent. It must be about the planet, because you have to ensure that there is something there for in the future for the people and for the planet, that there will be successive generations that will benefit from this country. And also the issue of peace. How can there be peace? People think that peace is only about war, but when there's disturbance and confusion, there is no peace also. It's also about, the framework is also integrative. And so it looks at the social dimensions, the physical dimensions, the environmental dimensions, the economy, and also the political issues which surround governance. The final framework I want to start with is the reparatory justice framework. And the reparatory justice framework right now is centered around people of African descent, because for some reason they don't think that we deserve reparations. And as we talk about reparations, you'll see that other groups have been given reparations, but for some reason they don't think that we are deserving. And since 2013, the CARICOM community has put together a reparatory justice program, and I think that they just admitted St. Martin as an associate member, and that's another thing I want to speak about. And it's now a global movement, and it's about ensuring that you get compensation, not just compensation, but you get reparations. And I'm writing a paper called From Compensation to Reparatory Justice, and I will share some of that if you also, and about the global movement. And the points raised by CARICOM include a full formal apology, but many more things to come than more than just that apology. And it must be a sincere apology, not something that is just given by the way. And so CARICOM also wants the issue of repatriation, indigenous peoples development, in the development of cultural institutions, assisting in remedying the public health crisis because of how we were forced and the stress we lived under and the foods that we ate. Our bodies can no longer metabolize sugar and salt properly. And it has become a genetic problem and a critical problem in the Caribbean. An education program. I heard your people talking about education. How can we now speak about the education of St. Martin? What are the people doing? What are we putting in place in the schools? Enhancing your historical and cultural knowledge, psychological rehabilitation, because there has been centuries of trauma on our people. The right to development through the use of technology. Technology is moving very quickly. How are we going to influence that? Because right now it's AI, it's automatic and automated. Are they building in racism into AI? We have to ask ourselves these questions. And also the issue of debt cancellation and monetary compensation for the Caribbean. We have had a lot of progress in the movement over the last decade, since CARICOM has put this in place, and we have seen coordination of the American system and what is happening there. You have seen that the United Nations Human Rights Council have called on countries to pay reparations for the ongoing legacies and harms of African enslavement. And I want to tell you that reparatory justice is not just for the past. It's not just for about enslavement. It is not just for about the harms that were done then, but the continuing harms that are being done through systemic racism. So that's one of the things you have to keep in mind. And we have seen progress with regard to universities, religious bodies, like the Church of England, major universities like Harvard, and so on, coming forward to say that they were part of that oppressive system and they want to pay reparations. We have seen reparations going on in Namibia and Tanzania. We have also seen countries that we didn't think would form reparatory justice groups have. I just came from the Permanent Forum meeting in New York last week, and countries like Colombia, Brazil, Panama, and Costa Rica are looking at the issue of reparations within their countries. We have received apologies from individuals, from families, from institutions like banks, insurance companies that insured these slave ships, etc., universities, as well as countries. And a recent study on the reparations for transatlantic slavery shows that says that it's about $107 trillion that is owed to the Caribbean with regard to reparations, and that the Netherlands owes at least $5 trillion, $3 trillion to go to Suriname, and $50 billion to go to Guyana. But what about the remainder? What about St. Martin? They have not broken it down yet. So there is a certain amount that is owed to this country for all the hard labor, especially in the salt mines of this country. And so because all countries have a right to development and there are many frameworks that are established, I thought that you should not settle just for projects. Instead, you need a comprehensive sustainable development plan. So the Dutch and other countries might come to you and say, let us do a project here, let us do a project there. But it does not come together into a sustainable development framework for the country. You are not projects, you are people. And so I think that this is one of the things that you have to take into consideration. And you have already embraced the SDGs, as I said in that document that you had. I looked at it, and it has some very good work. You have a database, you have a user portal, and you can look at your development policy initiatives in that regard, but you still need that comprehensive sustainable development plan. And you already noted that what you have in place is not a national development plan because it does not give you detailed strategies or actions, but rather just outlines a shared vision. You need to look at your goals in more depth. You have to look at your principles. You have to look at your strategic areas, and you have to look at all of the conditions that you need to put in place for effective decision making. And I certainly like the fact that you have a society that believes in democracy, but whose democracy? And is democracy limited? And is democracy only in place for certain people? Or to wrap us on our fingers to say that we are not being democratic, that we are corrupt people, that really and truly that corruption has a black face, when we know that is not the truth. So we have to look at all of these issues. So I'm glad that you have already conceptualized that and incorporated the issue of economic resilience, because a lot of sustainable development is about the economy. You will need to go further, as I said, in developing, going further than the National Development Vision. You will have to update your situation analysis. Since the hurricanes, you have to look at exactly where you are before you move on to sustainable development goals. You have to identify the gaps that exist. You have to link government actions with the relevant sustainable development goals and the Sid Samoa pathway, and I put in the Sid Samoa pathway there for sure because of the fact that we are also looking at climate justice. We have been forced into a situation where our people were brought in to develop colonial countries, And these colonial countries, because of their development, have created a man-made situation with regard to climate change. And now we are suffering again because of climate change, because of the destructive hurricanes. So we are receiving two forms of oppression. And you also have to review your budgetary process, because one of the very good things about the process that they have in the Virgin Islands is that they have tied in their spending with the Sustainable Development Goals, so that you can see what you're spending on and how you are achieving these goals as you move along. So it helps with monitoring and evaluation. And you know the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them. The first one is, of course, about poverty. We like to think that our countries are not poor because we have such big GDPs, but we know that distribution in our countries does not come to the poorest. And so you have an increasing wealth gap in all of our countries that we must address. So you know the goals, there are 17 of them, and some of them you might not think, but as somebody said in the previous discussion, you must decide for yourself what is your priority. So you can look at all the 17 goals. Maybe not all will apply to you directly, but most of them will apply to you, whether it is addressing hunger, whether it is looking at quality education or the health issues, or looking at infrastructure, or looking at partnerships, which are very important, looking at the blue economy, looking at the green economy, you know, looking at life on land and life below water. All of them become very important to us, especially as we are small island developing states. And so what does this mean to your country? What does sustainable development mean to your country? What opportunities do I think these are questions you should be asking. What opportunities do the SDGs create for you? What deficiencies exist within the SDGs? Because I myself think that although you should have a sustainable development plan, you should also assess the sustainable development goals, because there are deficiencies. They were not built for us. They were not built for people of African descent. We are not even mentioned. We are considered part of vulnerable groups. And so there are deficiencies that must be addressed. If they are having discussions on it, because many countries have not been able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, they are asking for an extension. Most countries will not achieve by 2030. So when they do the review, what do you want to see in it? And also, how do they relate to small island developing states? I think there are lots of opportunities that you should recognize, that the Sustainable Development Goals give you the opportunity to look at national goals and national outcomes. So it gives you a focus on output, and also for you to be results-based oriented. There's an alignment of priorities to the SDGs. You can look at what you do in your various ministries and align them to the SDGs, as I said before, that they must be people-centered and resilient focus, that you have issues related to capacity building, your review of your budget, development of an implementation framework, as well as monitoring and evaluation frameworks, which are very necessary for you to monitor these issues. As we go on, I want you to know, and I put this quotation here from Haile Selassie, to say that a country that has a plan is aware of its requirements. Are you aware of your requirements at this point in this country? Are you just going step by step or taking one step forward? What is the plan for the country? I think that is very necessary. So as we look forward and as we move forward, I think that you have to realize that your development must be based on justice. Development justice is important for you to continue to improve human well-being, to involve people in economic growth, to reduce poverty, to address inequalities and social justice, to address issues related to wealth, political freedom, education, all of the fundamentals of sustainable development. The right for you to have a voice. Do you now have a voice? Or are your decisions based on whether or not you will get that next tranche of money? That is not having a voice. That is being held hostage. About environmental justice, with regard to the fact that, and you must join the environmental justice movement because it is about building your resilience. You also must make that leap towards embracing, as a parliament, the issue of reparatory justice. It is not about making other people feel comfortable after centuries of inhumanity. You have to realize that there has been mind control and systemic racism, which we have to make sure that we remove. And you do have the opportunity to develop new partnerships once you make that step. Because part of the reason why a lot of countries that are still considered colonial are associate members of all of these regional bodies is because there is this fear that it is the colonial power that will attend these meetings and make these decisions. But I do not think that that should be an excuse. I think that one of the things that you must ask for is a review of your membership within these organizations to make you full members, because what we have to do then is to put it squarely in front of these colonial governments. Are you going to prevent these countries from participating fully in a regional organization? And when they tell us yes or no, we will know our next steps. We should not be taking a decision on our own to say, okay, they might be represented by a colonial power. Let us give the people, I think we are mature enough to make that decision and for us to ask for further decolonization of the regional integration movement. And you do have the opportunity to build global partnerships. Where I sat at the ACS, there were many countries that were willing to give funding to countries that were even considered colonial. And so you have to be able to approach these countries for you to be able to get the support that you need. I think that you must move towards beyond the commitment of just saying you agree to sustainable development that you made in your national development vision towards sustainable development itself. You have to be conscious that you must teach your own history. Don't let which is why I'm so glad I came after the first presentation, because it told me that you needed to teach people your own history, that you needed to control your own narrative moving forward, that you needed your voice, that you wanted debt removal, which is very important to all small island developing states, because we have not been treated fairly by these international institutions. We pay more in interest than any other set of countries. And we have to look towards consolidating our identity and our cultures, and we must move towards the removal of colonial ownership. I thank you so much.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. Suma, for that presentation. I almost wanted to clap, but of course. Thank you very much. I looked to my left to see if there any member of parliament who would like to have any remarks or pose any questions. I see member of parliament Heyliger-Marten, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Dr. Suma, for such an elaborate presentation. I hope that we have your presentation with us booked in, so it's a public document for those that would like to see it. I just have, I'm aware of everything you presented thus far, but you brought it in a different way, and coming from you, it makes a stronger point. For clarity's sake, recently our population was, I think, at 48,000? 58,000, okay. And with the 1.6 billion, it's billion guilders. So that's even less compared to St. Kitts. I have two small questions. What are your thoughts on people that say you can't eat autonomy? So in other words, how do autonomy, development, and putting food on the table go hand in hand? What are your thoughts on that? That's one question. And my final one, I've been told recently that they are looking into adding a 18th SDG. Can you elaborate on that, and if that's a fact, and what that 18th SDG is and why? That's my two questions. Thank you.
Before you proceed, Dr. Suma, I think there's another member of parliament that wants the floor. No? Okay, then I'll let you proceed with a response. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions. You know, it is what we were told when all of us said that we were going to become independent, that our people would starve, that there would be no development in our countries. In fact, let me tell you that in the Caribbean, that when the British, for example, left countries like the one I am from, we had 2 high schools because they thought that tertiary education, high school education, tertiary education was not for people who were formerly enslaved. So they didn't put these things in place. So we had more prisons than we had schools. On the eve of emancipation, I think Jamaica had 3 schools and 30-something prisons because they have always wanted to associate our freedom with further enslavement in prisons. And so there has always been this concept that small size, and books have been written about it, that people who are small cannot survive and cannot be autonomous. But the Caribbean is an example of the success, and denying them that ability to say, yes, look, you cannot survive. What they have done instead is to put in place systems that would continue to keep us oppressed. And even with these systems, we have been able to thrive. I think that one of the challenges right now is that Europe is under siege because of its decline. The decline of Europe is something that is very real. And so it is holding on and trying to even recolonize some of the countries. So by continuing to tell us that we will not get from them, but we don't get from them right now. We don't. We only get debt, because whatever they take to assist us, it comes out as our debt. So we might be eating under colonialism that exists right now, but will our children be able to eat when they are supposed to be paying back that debt? That is what the question I want to ask in return. So autonomy, self-determination, etc., is very important for you to be able to face the rest of the world, which is what most people don't want us to do as small island developing states. Yet we have a bigger voice because we are coming together. We have a bigger voice in many areas because we are at the table and we can speak for ourselves. What happens when our voice is not heard at all? When we are not autonomous enough? You are supposed to be autonomous, but we do not hear your voice on the global stage. We do not hear your voice on the global stage. But you are in this ambiguous situation that prevents you from speaking out about the poverty in your country, for example. That's only one example. I use the term, and that is because I feel free, because I heard your earlier presenters speak to the issue of human trafficking, so they were using new and modern language. So my new and modern input into that is house arrest. When you are under house arrest, you think that you have a certain amount of freedom. You can move around in that small space. But outside of that space, you are a prisoner. And that is what has happened with countries under colonialism. So you're not eating, but are you creating wealth for your people for them to be able to eat? How are you distributing what this country makes? If you have such a big GDP, and I am telling you that I got my figures from the World Bank statistics, That is what is reported globally. So what is happening when you have such a big GDP and recovering from a hurricane and things are coming back? And you can see the development. I have come to this country many times and I can see the development in this country. But how is the wealth of the country being distributed? These are things that you have to consider. And it is not just a simple question about whether or not there'll be bread on your plate tomorrow morning for breakfast, but whether or not your children will have bread in the future. The SDGs. There has been a discussion recently at the United Nations with regard to having another SDG, because the 17 SDGs, as I said, did not address the issue of people of African descent, and whether or not there should be a special SDG, especially when you look at the fact that the decade for people of African descent is going to end next year, whether there should be another decade, because most countries did not put anything in place to ensure that there was some kind of movement towards removing systemic racism. In fact, what you have seen in the last decade is a stranglehold by racism on our countries, and you can see it with what is happening in Africa. You can see it in the movement of people of African descent throughout the world through migration. You can see it in the fact that we continue to be the people whose statistics are at the bottom with regard to health and education, especially with regard to women and children of African descent. You know, we have a challenge because of the fact that racism and systemic racism is keeping us down. And we have to move forward in this regard. And so there's a movement in place. I cannot say that it will be accepted, but there's a movement to look at another SDG that looks at specifically people of African descent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suma, for the answer to the questions. I now turn the floor to a Member of Parliament. Duncan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to everyone once again. Thank you so much, Dr. Sumer, for your presentation. This committee itself was established a few years ago in the midst of this new, I don't want to call it a world order, but the Black Lives Matter movement had an impact in almost every country in every part of the world. And we are, again, living in a special time. If you have looked at what has happened with St. Martin, actually the Dutch Caribbean, if I want to call it that, the proposal of the COHO, this organization, but then I would say the demise of the COHO as well. That was us, especially politicians in this room, pushing against neocolonialism. We have, and as a people of color, a history of resistance. We're good at that. We know how to resist. We know how to fight back. But what I see now, especially following the apology from the Dutch government and the Prime Minister, is questions about what we are going to do moving forward. So how do we move from being fully concerned with resistance to, let's say, ideation and coming up with ideas on how to move forward? So at least in St. Martin, we got the apology, whether it was sincere or not. Now the Dutch are saying, okay, you get an apology now. What do you want to do with it? How can we not pay reparations, but provide funds to the country? What do you want to do with those funds? And our people are like, okay, we got to figure it out. And I feel like as a community, but as a people in general, we have been so used to just resisting all this time. And now it's time to look towards what does reparatory justice actually mean for us in terms of development, in terms of climate change actions, policy alleviation. From a pragmatic perspective, at least us here in St. Martin and in the rest of the islands in the kingdom, we're now the ball has been thrown in our court to decide what we want to do and how we see our future. So we've moved on from one stage, I believe, to another stage in a sense, because now we have to say, okay, this is what reparatory justice actually looks like. You know, we know that the Americans, many Americans talk about payments, 40 acres and a mule and so forth, but what does it look like for us, and how do we move from now being in what may be a driver's seat to saying this is how we will develop based on reparatory justice, developmental justice, and so forth moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Member of Parliament Duncan. Dr. Sommer, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a very big question. It is a very big question, but I will have you know that the Dutch and the apology that was given came from the CARICOM reparations, or it followed what the CARICOM reparations commission said. And that is only the first item on the agenda in that thing. So you do have a framework within, that is why I indicated there was the reparatory justice framework. You do have a framework to build on and to say what you want. So the apology, I don't know about its sincerity, the apology came, but the next steps are also there. The next steps are also there, because there are 9 other points, and the CARICOM Reparations Commission is in the process of reviewing after 10 years. It's 10 years since we made the declaration. We are in the process of reviewing to include new ones like climate justice, etc. So I would urge you to become more active within that commission, because it is now a global movement. As you said, the Black Lives Matter came after the CARICOM issue, but it gave it further impetus. It gave it further impetus, and so the United States is looking at, again, reparations. There's a lot of resistance to it, but there was a meeting today at the White House on it, this afternoon. So it is something that is gaining steam. There are states in the United States that are paying reparations, like California. Part of Chicago also, they are taxing their marijuana industry to be able to pay reparations. But I want you to know a couple of things. One, nobody can tell you what to do with your grandfather's back pay. Nobody should have the ability to tell you what to do with your reparations money. You decide that. That has nothing to do with the obligation to develop these countries. So whatever we do with our reparations money, I would like to see it going towards creating generational wealth. But nobody can tell you what to do with it. So they will tell you, oh, I will give you this money, but you must do X, Y, and Z for me to be able to give it to you. No. Nobody told the planters what to do with compensation. They built generational wealth, and they have consolidated their position in the world because of that generational wealth. In fact, we even paid some of that compensation, because it was not until 2015 that they finished paying off the compensation to the planters in the British colonies. We also paid. Haiti paid reparations. Nobody told the French what to do with the money they took from Haiti, which is now worth trillions of dollars, and Haiti is a poor country. Nobody has told them. So do not let them tell you what to do with. It is owed to you. It is an obligation. Nobody told the Jews what to do after the Holocaust with the money that was given to them. They have taken it and they have built generational wealth and consolidated their position in the world. Now they have the biggest lobby globally. Okay? And so your voice must be heard within the reparatory justice movement. Apart from that, I want you to know that you must move from looking at resistance only as upheaval, and I see resistance as war, because that's what we were doing. We were fighting a war for our humanity, and you must move towards resilience. How do you now build that resilience that you need. And I think that you can get that within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, even if it's shortcomings. That so you move, you look at the reparatory justice, and you must not let them say to you that the money you get for reparations is for your development. There's also developmental money owed. There's also money owed for climate justice. Do not confuse the various sets of money that is owed to us as people of African descent. And I think that for there to be sustainable development, there must be reparations. There must be reparations, because what are you asking us to sustain otherwise? What are you asking us to sustain? So we have to push these things alongside each other for us to be able to come up with that developmental framework for our small islands that will move us forward. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suma. And I am moved by the fact of what you said with regards to the issue of our money. Because you and I did not have that discussion. But last evening, I was talking to someone and I said, it is my money. I do with it whatever I feel like. It is mine. And unfortunately, we have some who would tell us it is their money, the Dutch taxpayers' money. And I had a discussion one time with a member of the First Chamber of Holland, and we were talking about financing and so on, and I said, you know, debt cancellation for me is very important, because my colleagues here in the committee, also members of parliament, when I submitted a motion in June 2021, it was unanimously passed where we requested our government to, in discussions with the Dutch, request debt cancellation. Because at present we are paying them 12.7 million on an annual basis, but 1.4 billion, you look at 80 to 90 years. And when I mentioned this to the member of the First Chamber, he said to me, but it is the Dutch taxpayers' money. And I said to him, I said, let us don't go there. I said, because you worked me as a slave for years, you never paid me a cent. I mean, he turned red, but that was okay. So what I'm saying, that we should not allow ourselves to be told what to do with our money. You mentioned Haiti, which is suffering today because of, I believe, the audacity of a little island being able to repel Spain, England, and France, you know, and they're being held, if I can use this word, captive up to today. That's right. That is what happened to Haiti. That's a fact. You mentioned the issue of I think, the budget and so on. Imagine, as you said, we are part of the kingdom. We are so-called autonomous, but we are in a charter that dictates how things should go. And therefore, again, it is a form of neocolonialism, because our very budget, and all tell us, yes, you agree to the kingdom law, they call it, but we're not allowed to have a deficit. So no matter what, which means it reflects on our capacity. So we can't hire, we can't increase salaries, but you still want us to advance and do reforms. Now, that doesn't make sense. And that's why I said to my colleagues, but again, I'm a member of parliament, not a minister, but I'm saying we cannot remain in a system where we are being suppressed and expect to get out without taking action. And the action that we take can have repercussions, of course, but if I look at St. Martin, and unfortunately what you said is correct, and it's correct in too many countries where there's a gap that is growing more between the haves and the have-nots. And how do you close that gap, I believe, is a very big challenge, because not only here, it's all over the world, unfortunately. But I very much appreciate your presentation. It's again, an eye-opener, and it's a confirmation that we have things to do ourselves. We got to stop talking and start taking actions. And I love you mentioned the issue of projects. We're not projects, we're people. And interestingly, I don't think you saw yesterday's newspaper, where it mentioned, I believe, some European fund were making 200 million euros available for the French side, but it has to be consumed or used before 2027. That's ridiculous. Because what I realized, even the Netherlands do it. What they do, put monies available for a project, knowing well that you don't have the capacity in order to prepare them. So by the time is up, the money goes back to where it came from. So those are the things, those are the tricks that are put on us that we have to definitely keep away from. And the issue of mind control. You know, I have discussion with persons who are telling us, yes, but the Dutch this and the Dutch. I said, wait a minute. I said, we have to stop allowing ourselves to be indoctrinated and to continue to receive the continuous systematic training and indoctrination, because they're going to tell us what they want us to know, what they want us to do. If we don't break out of that system, we can never advance ourselves. So, you know, there's so much here I can say, but I think you have really touched on a lot of issues that are important for us to start somewhere. And, but the issue of democracy and human rights, somebody asked me a question, who's human rights? Because, you know, United Nations Security Council, Africa, a big continent, don't have representatives on the why is that? So that's not democracy, that's dictatorship, you know what I mean? They're controlling us there. But I'm happy to see that we are hearing now, and I hope we get together, because we cannot achieve these things unless we get together. And I'm gonna stop with this. The late Mr. Fidel Castro, I followed a speech that he did in 1985, I believe. And he was asking Latin American countries and other countries to get together to demand of the colonial powers that they cancel our debt. But he said this, and when he said this, I was a bit discouraged. He said, but you know what happened? He said, they're not gonna listen. He said, we have to learn to work together, because together we are stronger and we can make things happen. So, Dr. Soma, thank you very much for your presentation. Any other questions from my colleagues? No? I hope this is not the last. I definitely hope that we're going to get you back here again, because as we progress, we'll definitely need more assistance, more advice. And I think it's important that we join the CARICOM Reparations Committee. And you see, in our system, we have what you call, they say that the international affairs are affairs of the kingdom. Now I'm saying, who's the kingdom? I thought we had the kingdom also, because it consists of 4 countries. So I'm saying they cannot tell us any longer. I'll let them say it, but we make sure that we join whatever organization we can in order to make our voices heard and let people know exactly what we are doing, what we're all about. Again, thank you very much. And nothing else, I hereby, yes, you want to say, yes, please.
I just wanted to say thank you also to you for giving me this opportunity. It's my life's work. It's part of my activism. But I want to leave you with this year is the 60th anniversary of that famous speech by Haile Selassie at the United Nations. The speech that made Bob Marley's song very famous. Until the philosophy that holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, there's a lot more to that speech, and I urge you to look at it for you to understand that we have been fighting for this equality for a long time, and that all of us recognize it. Must come.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stone. I hereby close this meeting.